This time we look at 5 classic middleweights from the 1970s. Before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. The motorcycle market of the 1970s was a period of great innovation and variety, particularly when you compare it to the modern market. Here are 5 really great middleweight motorcycles from that period. The Honda CB500 4. In the 1970s, Honda wanted to follow up the great success of the CB750 with something smaller and lighter, but more suitable to the marketplace, 750s being a big and expensive bike to run. In America they introduced a CB354, and then followed this up in Europe with the CB404, which is regarded by many as a classic. But to me it's a little bit revvy, only making about 37 horsepower from a 4-cylinder engine. The 500s and later 550s, however, are much nicer. The 554 makes around 50 horsepower and is good for probably around 115 miles an hour, and is generally a much better all-round machine than the 400 is, even though the 400 is generally seen as a bit more desirable these days. The engine follows the familiar single overhead cam format with 4 cylinders of course. There's a disc brake on the front and a drum brake on the rear, which are okay I suppose. As you won't expect from a Honda at this time, there's all the mod cons, indicators, electric start and all that you would normally expect. There's a kickstart too of course, because people didn't completely trust electric starts at that time. The machines are much lighter and more nimble than the 752, with Bill Smith winning the 1973 500 production GT on one of these machines. All round, these are great little bikes. And for the classic bike buyer, they make great buys, easy to ride, reliable and fairly cheap too. Suzuki's GT 380 and 550 two-stroke triples. These piston-ported 3-cylinder two-strokes are excellent little bikes. They produce very linear power and are very nice on the road. The gearboxes are smooth and generally they're pretty good all-round bikes. A good friend of mine owned one of these bikes and I had a go on it a couple of times, and I can say that they're really nice modern feeling bikes, particularly by the standards of the time. They're probably most noticeable for the shroud that covered the cylinder head. This was called the ram air system, which basically ducted air over the cylinder head, which in theory at least aided cooling while the machines were moving forward. How efficiently this system worked is open to debate, but it was a good tagline. As with the Honda, there's a disc brake on the front and a drum brake on the rear, so braking is fairly marginal by modern standards. But all round the controls and everything about this bike is pretty well developed. There's even a gear position indicator, was something of a rarity on machines. The GT series was seen very much as touring bikes, and Suzuki went to great lengths to try and develop a 2-stroke machine which behaved in a way more like a 4-stroke machine, giving it a very refined feel, and having ridden these bikes I can bear out that that is very much the case. In the end, of course, with emission regulations coming in, Suzuki did the fairly obvious thing, and instead of building a 2-stroke that behaved like a 4-stroke, they just built a 4-stroke instead. But that is another story for another day I feel. These bikes are great. The chassis are pretty good by the standards of the time, the brakes are okay, and generally these are a great fun little bike to ride, although they are becoming increasingly popular and therefore expensive. The BMW R65 and R45 models. With BMW's current series of boxers in the 70s being all the way out now to 800cc and 1000cc, BMW were beginning to think that these bikes were getting quite large, so they felt what they needed was a smaller, lighter weight version, in a way like Motor Guts' V35 and V50 range, something that looked very much like the bigger bikes, but was actually a little bit smaller and more scaled down. Not that the R65 is a particular small bike, you understand. Many dismissed the R45 as being grossly underpowered. This is largely because a German market version only produced 27 horsepower, although it was 30 odd for the rest of Europe. The R65 however was rather more useful, producing, at least in the early models, around 45 horsepower. Later models this was increased to around 50. There are a number of variations on the range of R65 models, including the S model, which was designed by the same guy that designed Suzuki's Katana, Hans Muff, and enjoys fairly similar styling. The R65 Lightweight handled better than their bigger brothers, and were a little bit less lumpy, and felt a little bit less sluggish too. All round, a very good buy for the sensible BMW fan. Laverda's 350 and 500cc parallel twins. First appearing in 1977, these double overhead cam parallel twins were very advanced machines for the day, as is fairly typical for Laverda at that time, who were really at the cutting edge of what the Italian manufacturers were capable of. Production quality is always very good at Laverda, and it is also on these bikes too. Both the 350 and the 500 were available in a range of models, including Turismo models and sportier models. They're all pretty much the same bike, with only slight tweaks and variations. Laverda were not slow to catch on that a lightweight, nippy machine may be good for use in production racing. As such, they developed a 500cc production racer. This machine produced around 64 horsepower instead of the approximate 50 that the standard 500 twin did, and was of course, as a result, very much more rapid. Of course, most people on the market for Laverda are probably on the lookout for a 3-cylinder bike, such as the Jota or one of the 3Cs. But the fact is these machines are very expensive, so the small parallel twins can make a very good choice if you're on a budget, relatively speaking, or you're actually just on an A2 license. They are compatible after all. The Yamaha RD400. When most people hear the words RD in association with a Yamaha, they're of course thinking of the parallel twin 350 LC models. But these machines didn't come along till around 1979-1980. Their predecessor was an air-cooled parallel twin. These were in production between 1976 and 1979 and were very much the LC of their day. And of course much of the design philosophy which you see on the LCs is applied to these earlier air-cooled models too. They have a very good chassis with excellent brakes, discs all round, and produce really good power, mostly at the top end because these bikes are really designed to be ridden hard. That said, by the standards of the day they're reliable two-strokes. The LCs of course being water-cooled are that bit more reliable and less prone to seizure, but these reed valve two-strokers are pretty solid machines anyway. The reed valve engine used in these bikes makes around 44 horsepower at 7,500 RPM and produces of course a lot of its power high up the rev range. To compensate for the engine's peaky nature, Yamaha gave the bike an excellent 6-speed gearbox. All round, these really are the hooligan's choice in the 1970s. Although their power falls inside the A2 limit, and of course they're not as collectible as the liquid-cooled later LC models. This is just our first 5 of what's going to be a range of videos. But which middleweights would you choose from the 70s? Comment below. Well, I do hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, thank you very much for watching.